Don't move!
Okay, I'm putting it down.
They came at midnight with fake badges and flashing lights. But they had no idea the man they tried to arrest was the FBI's most feared agent. The sirens weren't real, but they felt real enough. Red and blue strobes carved jagged light across the manicured lawns of a quiet suburban street in Virginia. Midnight cicadas fell silent, as if even the insects knew something was wrong. A black SUV blocked the narrow cul-de-sac, its tires crunching the gravel edge of the curb. The sound of boots followed. 3 men stepping out, their radios crackling with static that had no real signal. They weren't cops, but they carried themselves like they were. The leader, tall and broad, tugged a badge-shaped patch stitched to his vest, HO, a security enforcement. Beneath his hand, a pistol grip gleamed under the streetlight. Across the street, a porch light clicked on. Neighbors stirred behind curtains. In the driveway stood a man they believed they knew, Darius Cole, a 42-year-old black homeowner with an unshakable calm, always seen mowing his lawn at the same hour, waving politely, blending into the predictable rhythm of the neighborhood. But tonight, that quiet facade was about to be ripped open. "Step away from the vehicle," one of the fake officers barked, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. His hand trembled, though, betraying the bravado. The SUV's headlights pinned Darius in the glow, as if he were prey caught in a hunter's scope. Inside his chest, his heartbeat was a steady war drum, not from fear, but from something colder. Calculation. He'd seen this before. The posturing. The too clean gear with logos stitched just a shade too crooked. The badges that reflected light but carried no weight. These weren't police. They weren't even HOA board members. They were something worse. Amateurs playing at power, blind to the beast they were poking. "Sir, you are under arrest for multiple violations of HOA code, including unauthorized vehicle storage and..." The leader barely finished his sentence before Darius raised one eyebrow, his expression almost bored. "HOA code?" Darius's voice was calm, deep, measured. At midnight, with sidearms and flashing lights, he stepped closer, slow enough to unnerve them, his shadow swallowing their theatrics whole. But here's what the men didn't know, and what no one on that street could have guessed. Darius Cole wasn't just a homeowner. He wasn't just a neighbor. For 20 years, he had been the government's silent hand, the name whispered in underground circles with dread. The man who interrogated warlords, hunted international hit squads, and dismantled cartels from the inside. They didn't know they had just tried to arrest one of the FBI's most feared counterintelligence agents, the kind of man whose eyes had already measured the angle of their holsters, the weak stitching on their tactical vests, and the hesitation in their breathing. And in that moment, Darius knew this was no random stunt. This was a setup. Someone had sent these imposters. Someone wanted him out of the picture. The street held its breath. Somewhere, a dog barked and then went silent. One of the imposters gripped his weapon tighter, whispering, "Why is he not scared?" The answer was simple. They had just stepped into a game they didn't understand, and Darius Cole never lost. Darius didn't flinch, didn't step back. Instead, he tilted his head as though he were examining a stain on their uniforms. The men expected panic, compliance, fear. What they got instead was a silence that pressed harder than any shouted order. Behind his stillness, memories stirred, the kind he rarely let himself touch, his father's words echoing from years ago. "A man who knows himself never needs to raise his voice. The world will hear him anyway." Darius had carried that lesson from the cracked sidewalks of Newark all the way into the Bureau's darkest corridors. The street, for the neighbors, was just another HOA dispute. They whispered from their windows, ready to film on shaky phones, imagining fines and parking violations. But the truth cut deeper. This was the beginning of something orchestrated, deliberate, dangerous. The leader of the fake squad stiffened, gesturing with his weapon. "On your knees." Now his voice carried, but his stance betrayed doubt. Darius's eyes narrowed. He read people the way others read books, small details telling entire stories. The man's finger hovered too nervously near the trigger, his jaw clenched not with discipline, but with fear. And the way the second man scanned the street, darting eyes, shallow breaths, he wasn't law enforcement. He was a hired gun, barely trained. You boys rehearsed this in the mirror, didn't you? Darius finally spoke, his tone almost conversational, but edged with something sharp enough to slice through their act. Lights, vests, guns. But there's one thing you forgot. The tallest one bristled. And what's that? Authority, Darius said simply. Silence cracked open. For a moment, the night air itself seemed to retreat, waiting for the next move. Because Darius wasn't just some man cornered in his driveway. He had built a life, layer by layer, to protect his cover. To the Bureau, he was a weapon they unleashed only when situations went beyond control. To his neighbors, he was just the quiet widower who took his teenage daughter to school every morning, who kept his hedges trimmed, who smiled politely but never shared much about himself. Her name was Maya, 15, sharp-eyed, full of questions he rarely answered. She was upstairs now, reading, the glow of her bedroom light faint against the blinds. Darius knew she might already be watching the commotion, phone in hand, ready to dial 911. His pulse quickened, not from the threat against him, but the possibility of her seeing a side of him he had worked so hard to bury. Because Maya only knew fragments of the man her father truly was. She knew the bedtime stories, the gentle warnings, the way he always checked the locks twice. She didn't know about Kabul safe houses or the years he had spent dismantling drug pipelines in South America. She didn't know how many times he had sat across from killers, his calm silence breaking them down until they confessed their darkest truths. And that was how he wanted it. To her, he was dad, just dad. The man who never missed her piano recitals, who packed her lunch with handwritten notes, not the shadow who walked in places where light dared not go. The impostors, though, were forcing his two worlds to collide, and that was unforgivable. The leader barked again, louder perhaps to drown out his own unease. Final warning! Knees, hands behind your head. From across the street, an elderly neighbor whispered to his wife, Looks like Cole's in trouble with the HOA. Finally. They chuckled nervously, blind to the storm tightening around them. Darius raised his hand slowly, but his eyes, those steel gray eyes, never left the men. He'd learned long ago that sometimes surrender was the fastest path to control, that every second he appeared to give them was another second to calculate, to memorize, to anticipate. But even as he knelt on the cool concrete of his driveway, his mind wasn't in Virginia anymore. It was in a rain-soaked alley in Prague, where a cartel enforcer once pressed a gun to his temple. It was in a Moscow apartment, where he had waited 12 hours without moving, breathing slow enough to be mistaken for furniture, until the arms dealer made his move. Every breath, every twitch of these impostors' hands told him more than they realized. These men weren't after HOA fines. They weren't even after intimidation. They were here for him, and someone somewhere wanted to test the legend of Darius Cole. Upstairs, Maya's curtain shifted. A sliver of her face appeared, wide-eyed. Darius caught it in the corner of his vision. He exhaled softly, hiding his concern. He couldn't let her see fear, because fear, once planted, grew like wildfire. The leader nodded at his men. One stepped forward, zip ties in hand. Darius stayed still, his body relaxed, his muscles deceptively loose. But beneath the surface, the calculation was complete. He had the measure of all three, the angle of approach, the rhythm of their breathing, the fatal flaw in their formation. They had no idea they were standing inches from the edge of their own downfall. The world thought of him as retired, invisible, just another man in the suburbs. But predators had a way of drawing out predators, and tonight the hunters had chosen the wrong prey. Darius Cole was about to remind them, and whoever sent them, that legends don't fade quietly. The imposter with the zip ties crouched low, his boots scraping against the driveway. His hands shook slightly as he reached for Darius's wrists. From the corner of his eye, Darius caught the faintest tremor in the man's jaw, a bead of sweat tracing his temple. He was nervous, green. That meant inexperienced. Inexperience meant predictable. Darius flexed his fingers as if surrendering fully, then let his shoulders sag. The moment the plastic tie brushed his skin, he pivoted his wrists inward, twisting with surgical precision. The tie slipped, the man lost balance, and in a blink, Darius had the man's wrist locked in a joint hold. The sound was subtle but sharp, the pop of ligaments bending the wrong way. The imposter cried out, stumbling back, his weapon clattering against the concrete. The leader's gun snapped up. "Don't move," he barked, voice breaking with sudden panic. But Darius was already moving, controlled, fluid. His knee struck the fallen man's chest, pinning him flat. He scooped up the drop-out pistol, flipped the magazine release, and slid it across the driveway. Useless now. The second imposter lunged forward, too quick, too angry. Darius stepped aside, his hands snapping to the man's collar, dragging him down with the force of gravity itself. The man slammed into the hood of Darius's car, the thud echoing through the street. Gasps broke out from the watching neighbors. Curtains rustled. A woman whispered, "Oh my God." The leader froze. His gun wavered between Darius and his fallen men. Sweat dripped from his brow. He wasn't expecting resistance, not like this. Darius straightened slowly, his stance calm but commanding. "Drop it," he said, his tone quiet but laced with finality. The leader's hand trembled. He tried to harden his voice. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Darius stepped forward, eyes unblinking. "Neither do you." For a heartbeat, it seemed the man might fire, but then headlights cut across the street, another vehicle turning into the cul-de-sac. Not a police cruiser, a black sedan, tinted windows. It slowed deliberately, parking behind the imposter's SUV. The air shifted. This wasn't random anymore. This was orchestrated. Reinforcements. The leader's shoulders straightened, confidence returning. He smirked. "Looks like your luck's out, tough guy." The sedan doors opened. Two figures stepped out. Unlike the others, these men were composed. Their suits fit too well, their movements too controlled. Professionals, not amateurs. One of them, a clean-shaven man with icy blue eyes, surveyed the scene with mild amusement. His gaze lingered on Darius. He didn't bother reaching for a weapon. Instead, he smiled. "Agent Cole," he said softly, his voice carrying authority without effort. "You really do live up to the stories." The neighbors froze. "Agent?" The word hung in the night like a thunderclap. A murmur rippled across the watching crowd. Darius's jaw tightened. His cover shredded in an instant. The man with blue eyes tilted his head. "Relax. We're not here to kill you. Not tonight. We're here with a message." Darius's pulse slowed, but his mind sharpened. He knew this type. Intelligence operatives, mercenaries for hire, men who carried messages in blood and bone. Whoever this was, they had dug deep enough to know his true name, his real history. That meant the danger wasn't just to him, it was to Maya. He glanced at her window, still cracked open, her eyes still watching. He felt the weight of her gaze like a knife pressing against his back. He had to control this before her world collapsed entirely. "What message?" Darius asked, his tone even. The man smiled faintly, pacing like a wolf circling prey. "Retired doesn't mean forgotten, Cole. You've made enemies. Some of them want you gone. Others want you reminded. Consider tonight a courtesy call, a warning." The leader of the fake squad looked at the suited men with confusion, as if realizing he was only a pawn in a much larger game. His earlier bravado shrank under the professional shadow. Darius's voice was quiet, but each word struck like a hammer. "If this was a warning, you failed. You brought it to my doorstep. You involved my daughter. That makes it personal." The man's smile widened. "Good. Then you understand. Tell her to pack a bag, because next time it won't be a warning." The words slid into the air like poison. Darius's fists clenched at his sides. Every instinct screamed to strike, to end this now, to silence the threat. But his training chained him to patience. He couldn't reveal the full weight of his abilities in front of Maya, in front of neighbors, in front of phones recording from every window. This wasn't just a fight, it was a stage. The man checked his watch, then turned toward the sedan. "We'll be in touch." He gestured for his companion. Both slid back into the car, doors closing with precision. The engine purred. The sedan rolled away, leaving silence heavy enough to crush lungs. The impostors, bruised and humiliated, scrambled toward their SUV, dragging their injured comrade. Tires squealed. Within seconds, the street was empty again. But nothing was normal. Not anymore. Neighbors spilled from their porches now, murmuring, whispering, filming. Some shouted questions. Others stared at Darius as if seeing him for the first time. Darius stood in the center of it all, his chest heaving once, twice, before he forced himself to calm. He looked up at Maya's window. Their eyes met. Her face was pale, her phone clutched in her hand. He mouthed a single word, later. She disappeared from the window, curtain falling shut. Inside, the neighborhood buzzed with confusion, speculation, fear. But inside Darius's chest burned something else, rage. Whoever those men were, they had crossed a line no one crossed. And for the first time in years, he felt the dormant part of himself, the part the Bureau had built, the part enemies feared, rise to the surface. The predator was awake, and he would find them, no matter what it cost. The house was silent, but inside Darius's head, storms raged. He sat at the kitchen table, a single lamp casting a pale circle of light over the worn wood. His daughter Maya sat across from him, knees pulled to her chest, her wide eyes fixed on him. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Who were those people? Why did they call you Agent?" For 15 years, Darius had guarded this moment, shielding her from shadows that lived under his skin. But tonight, the shadows had walked straight into their home. He exhaled, long and heavy, feeling the weight of every secret pressing against him. "You remember when I told you I used to travel for work?" His voice was calm, even. Maya nodded slowly. "I didn't work for a company. I worked for the Bureau, FBI, counterintelligence." Maya's breath caught. "You're an agent?" "I was. I retired when your mother died. I promised her I'd raise you away from that world." His eyes darkened. But tonight, that world found us again. Silence stretched between them, thick with things unspoken. Maya's hand tightened around her phone. "So what happens now?" Darius's jaw clenched. He looked past her, into the night, where the memory of the blue-eyed man's smile still lingered like a stain. "Now, I remind them why they should have left me buried." The next night, he moved like a ghost through his office, one no neighbor ever entered. A wall of books swung open, revealing the arsenal behind it. Encrypted laptops, weapons sealed in foam, burner phones, stacks of old case files. He hadn't touched them in years. His fingers lingered on the cold steel of a Glock, the worn handle of a combat knife, the tools of a man he'd sworn to put away. But promises meant nothing if Maya wasn't safe. He powered up a secure terminal, screens flickering alive. Within minutes, he was tracing the sedan's plates, the fake HOA unit's comms chatter, digging into shadows only he knew how to navigate. Threads unraveled quickly. The impostors weren't random thugs. They were contracted through a shell company in Eastern Europe, one tied to a man Darius thought long gone, Viktor Malenkov. The name alone pulled Darius back years, cold Moscow nights, interrogation rooms filled with cigarette smoke, dossiers thick with blood. Malenkov had been a high-ranking intelligence officer who defected, then disappeared into the underworld. Darius had chased him across 3 countries before finally shutting his operation down, or so he believed. And now Malenkov had resurfaced, with a message on his doorstep. Darius's lips pressed into a line. The warning wasn't just personal, it was strategic. Malenkov wasn't just after him. He was after revenge, legacy, and control. And if he had operatives already inside the States, the threat was larger than one family. But Darius wasn't the type to call in backup, not yet. This fight had started at his home. It would end with his hands. 2 nights later, the trap was set. The cul-de-sac slept under a blanket of quiet, but Darius wasn't home. Instead, he was 10 miles away, inside the skeleton of an abandoned steel factory, one Malenkov had been using as a covert hub. His intel had led him here, to rusted catwalks and echoing silence. Every step crunched against broken glass. The air reeked of oil and decay. But Darius moved without sound, his body melding into shadow. He was back in his element, the predator hunting prey. From above, voices echoed, Russian, sharp, and clipped. Darius understood every word. They spoke of shipments, surveillance, a target, his house. His teeth clenched. He scaled the catwalk ladder silently, emerging into a nest of activity. Crates stacked high, computers running, armed guards patrolling lazily, unaware of death stalking them. At the center of it all sat Viktor Malenkov himself, older, heavier, but with the same cruel eyes. Darius froze in the shadows, watching the man laugh with his lieutenants, cigarette smoke curling around his face. The memories came rushing, years of chasing this man, the lives lost to his schemes, the way he slipped through justice like smoke through fingers. But tonight there would be no slipping away. Darius struck like lightning. The first guard never saw the knife that slit his throat. The second fell with a silenced shot to the temple. Panic spread before shouts even rose. Darius moved through them with precision, each step an execution, each strike a reminder of why his name was feared. Cole! Malenkov's voice boomed, thick with disbelief and fury. He staggered back, drawing a pistol, his lieutenants scrambling for cover. I knew you couldn't stay buried. Darius emerged from the smoke and shadows, his eyes cold, his weapon raised. And I knew you'd crawl back into the light. Gunfire erupted. Sparks lit the catwalks, bullets ricocheting off steel beams. Darius rolled, fired, dropped one lieutenant, then another. The factory thundered with chaos, but he moved like he had a map written in his blood. Finally, it was just him and Malenkov. The Russian panted, aiming his pistol with trembling hands. You can't kill me, Cole. I am bigger than you, bigger than your bureau. You cut off one head, 3 more grow. Darius's voice was steady, lethal. Then I'll cut faster. Malenkov fired. Darius sidestepped, the bullet grazing his arm. Pain seared, but he didn't falter. He closed the distance in seconds, knocking the pistol away, slamming Malenkov against a rusted beam. Their fists collided, raw, brutal. Years of hatred poured into every strike. Malenkov was strong, fueled by rage, but Darius was precise, fueled by purpose. Blow after blow landed until finally Darius caught him in a chokehold, his arm crushing against the man's windpipe. Malenkov gurgled, thrashing. Darius's lips brushed his ear. You should have stayed gone. With one final twist, the fight ended. The factory fell silent again, except for Darius's steady breathing. He stood over Malenkov's motionless body, sweat dripping, blood staining his sleeve. For a long moment, he stared down at the man. Then he pulled a phone from his pocket, dialing a number he hadn't used in years. This is Cole, he said into the receiver. Cleanup needed. Factory district. Target neutralized. There was a pause on the line. Then a familiar voice, the Bureau's deputy director. Darius, you're supposed to be retired. Not anymore. This was the night Darius Cole stepped out of the shadows he had built around himself. The predator had returned, and the world, the enemies who thought him gone, were about to remember why they feared his name. The factory burned in the distance, smoke curling into the early dawn sky like a warning flare no one could ignore. Darius drove home in silence, the black SUV humming beneath his steady hands. His arm throbbed from the bullet graze, but pain was secondary now. What mattered was Maya. The cul-de-sac was waking as he pulled in. Neighbors watered lawns, collected newspapers, glanced his way with suspicion and whispers. Word of the midnight raid had spread fast. Some eyed him with fear, others with a curiosity that felt colder than judgment. Darius ignored them. He had long learned the difference between neighbors and allies. Inside the house, Maya sat at the kitchen table, her phone discarded beside her untouched cereal. When she saw him, her eyes widened, not at the blood on his sleeve, but at the expression on his face. It was the look of a man who had crossed a line and couldn't step back. You're hurt, she whispered, standing quickly. I've been worse, Darius said, his voice gentle but gravel-worn. He lowered himself into the chair opposite her, the same spot where the truth had spilled out days earlier. Maya's hands trembled as she tried to clean his wound with a towel. You killed them, didn't you? The question hung heavy between them. Darius didn't lie. Yes. Maya froze. For a moment, fear flickered across her face. Fear not of the men outside, but of her father. Then slowly her eyes softened. They came for us. You didn't have a choice. Darius swallowed hard. Her words cut deeper than the wound. He had spent years burying the predator inside him, trying to raise his daughter in a world of piano recitals and school dances. But last night proved what he had always feared. The shadows he lived in would never let him go. I wanted to keep you away from this, he admitted, voice breaking slightly. All of it. The lies, the danger, the blood. But the truth is, this is who I am, and now it's who we are. Maya didn't flinch. She set the towel down and met his eyes. Then teach me how to survive it. The words struck like a blade and a balm at once. She wasn't running. She wasn't breaking. She was her mother's daughter, unyielding, resilient, forged by fire she hadn't chosen. Darius reached across the table, gripping her hand firmly. I will. But you have to promise me one thing. No matter how dark it gets, you don't lose yourself. That's the real fight. Maya nodded, tears brimming. Later that week, the bureau came. Black SUVs, real this time. No fake badges, no stage theater. The deputy director himself stepped into Darius's driveway, flanked by agents who tried not to look too closely at the man who once trained their mentors. You've made a lot of noise, Cole, the director said, voice low. Malenkov's dead. Half his network scattered. The bureau wants you back. Darius stood tall, Maya by his side. He glanced at her, then back at the director. I'm not your weapon anymore. I'll help clean up this mess, but my priority is her. You understand? The director's gaze softened slightly. Understood. But know this. When men like Malenkov fall, others rise. You've painted a target on your back again. Darius's eyes hardened. Good. Let them try. The director nodded, almost in respect, then returned to his convoy. Engines roared, tires crunched, and the bureau faded from the cul-de-sac, leaving whispers in its wake. That night, father and daughter stood on the back porch, fireflies sparking across the lawn. The world felt deceptively calm. Maya leaned against the railing, watching the stars. Do you ever regret it? She asked softly. The life you lived before me? Darius thought for a long moment. Regret? Number, every choice led me to you, but sometimes I wish the world let men like me stay buried. He glanced at her, his voice low but fierce. What I regret is that you had to see it, that you had to know who I really am. Maya's hand slipped into his. I'd rather know the truth than live a lie. For the first time in years, Darius smiled. Not the polite neighbor's smile, but something raw and real. Then the truth is this. Whatever comes next, we face it together. The camera of this story doesn't linger on explosions or gunfire. It lingers on a quiet street where a father and daughter stand in the twilight, their bond forged stronger than steel. It lingers on the uncomfortable stares of neighbors who now question the man they thought they knew, on the echo of sirens that never came when impostors terrorized him in his own driveway, on the unsettling truth that authority, real or fake, can be wielded as a weapon until someone with true courage stands against it. And it lingers on a single question that should haunt every viewer who has watched this unfold. What would you do if the wolves came to your door wearing the mask of the law? Darius Cole knew his answer. He didn't run. He didn't cower. He stood, he fought, and he reminded the world that true strength isn't in a badge, a uniform, or even a gun. It's in the refusal to bow to fear. So if this story moved you, if it made your heart pound or your mind question, remember this. The shadows we ignore are often closer than we think. Share this story. Talk about it. Reflect on it. Because silence only feeds the imposters. And when they come knocking, will you be ready?